Okay, so you want to be like Steve? Build the most valuable company on earth? Invent the phone that rewired human behavior? Turn a garage into a trillion-dollar religion? Stand on a stage in a black turtleneck and make the entire world lean forward? That's the version they sell you. Here's what it doesn't show you. The father who gave him up for adoption. The company he built and was then thrown out of. The tumor he tried to wish away with carrot juice in denial. The employees who left meetings in tears. The friends who stopped being friends. The version of success that cost him almost everything else. This isn't the story of Steve Jobs' life. It's the story of how his mind worked. Because the products aren't really the mystery. The mystery is the machine that built them. By the end of this, you'll understand the mental patterns behind almost every decision he made, the brilliant ones and the brutal ones. Let's start with a moment that made no sense on paper. 1997. Apple is 90 days from bankruptcy. Jobs, just returned after being exiled 12 years earlier, walks into a product review. Engineers have built dozens of products: laptops, desktops, printers, a sprawling, reasonable, diversified lineup. Jobs looks at it all. Then he draws a simple grid on a whiteboard. 2 columns, 2 rows, consumer, pro, desktop, portable, 4 boxes. He kills almost everything else. 70% of the product line, gone, overnight. People thought he'd lost his mind. He hadn't. He just revealed the first pattern that ran underneath his entire life. He didn't believe in doing more. He believed that saying no was the real creative act. Focusing is about saying no, he told his team. Not once, constantly. Because Jobs had learned something, most people never learned that having too many good ideas is just as dangerous as having none. You drown in your own potential. This wasn't a business tactic he picked up from a book. It came from somewhere stranger. In his 20s, he'd spent time studying Zen Buddhism, sitting with a teacher named Kobun Chino, sometimes for hours, in silence. Zen doesn't teach you to add. It teaches you to strip away until only the essential remains. Jobs took that philosophy out of the monastery and dropped it directly into product design, which is why an iPod launched with a single button, why the first iPhone deleted the keyboard entirely, why Apple's packaging became as obsessed over as the product inside it. But focus alone doesn't explain everything, because focus without a feel for beauty just gives you a very simple, very ugly product. That's where the second pattern comes in, and it's the one people underestimate the most. Jobs cared about how things looked and felt with an intensity that seemed, to most executives, almost irrational. He once redesigned the motherboard inside the original Macintosh, the part no customer would ever see because he thought the layout of the chips wasn't elegant. Engineers argued it was pointless. Nobody opens a computer to admire the circuit board. Jobs didn't care. He'd learned, years earlier, in a single college class he wasn't even supposed to be taking, that beauty isn't decoration, it's structure. That class was calligraphy, the history of typefaces, the spacing between letters, the reason some fonts feel calm and others feel aggressive. He had no plan to use it. He just found it beautiful. 10 years later, it became the reason the Macintosh had the first real typography of any computer. Every font on every laptop and phone you've ever used carries a thread back to that one decision. This is the part almost nobody notices about Jobs. He wasn't just building technology. He was building the emotional experience of using technology. He believed a product should feel inevitable, like it always should have existed exactly this way. But taste like that comes with a shadow side. And this next pattern is the one that made him, by his own team's account, genuinely difficult to work for. Jobs trusted his own instinct over almost anyone else's data. Apple's engineers, ahead of the first iPhone launch, begged him to include a physical keyboard. Every competitor had one. Every focus group said people needed tactile buttons to type properly. The market research pointed one direction. Jobs pointed the other way. He believed customers couldn't tell you what they wanted next because they'd never seen it yet. People don't know what they want until you show it to them, he said, and he meant it as an operating principle, not a slogan. That instinct produced the touchscreen phone that redefined the entire industry. But the same instinct, aimed in the wrong direction, produced disasters. The Apple III overheated because Jobs insisted, against engineering advice, that it needed no cooling. Fans were noisy, and noise wasn't elegant. The machines cooked themselves. It was a humiliating, expensive failure. That's the strange, uncomfortable truth about Jobs' mind. The same certainty that created the iPhone also created his worst mistakes. He rarely knew, in the moment, which one he was standing inside. Nobody around him could always tell either. That kind of certainty needed somewhere to come from, and it wasn't confidence in the way most people mean it. Former colleagues had a name for it, the reality distortion field. Jobs could look at an engineer and insist a project scheduled to take months should take weeks, and somehow, astonishingly, the team would deliver it. He didn't just have high standards. He seemed to genuinely believe that normal constraints were optional if you wanted something badly enough. Sometimes that belief was delusion. It burned people out. It ended friendships. Longtime collaborators described being reduced to tears in product reviews, called things far worse than wrong. But sometimes that same delusion was the only reason anything difficult got made at all. The first Macintosh team wore t-shirts that said 90 hours a week and loving it, not because Jobs forced the hours, but because he'd convinced them the impossible thing they were building was worth it. This is where his thinking gets genuinely hard to categorize as good or bad. It was both, running on the same wiring. And there was one more piece underneath all of it, the part that explains why he came back at all. In 1985, Jobs was pushed out of the company he founded, not laid off quietly. He was voted out, publicly, by a board he'd hired the CEO for himself. Most people, at that level of humiliation, disappear. Jobs didn't. He started a new computer company, Next. It struggled commercially, but its software would later become the foundation of everything Apple builds today. He also bought a small, struggling animation division from Lucasfilm for $5 million. He renamed it Pixar. For years, Pixar bled money. Jobs kept funding it personally, against the advice of nearly everyone close to him. Then Toy Story happened. By the time Apple bought Next in 1997 to bring Jobs back, he wasn't returning as the wounded founder crawling home. He was returning as the man who'd quietly built two of the most important companies of his era, while everyone assumed he was finished. He described the firing years later at Stanford in language that reframed the whole decade. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. He called getting fired from Apple the best thing that could have happened to him. That's not a coping mechanism. That's a mental model. The belief that being wrong publicly isn't the end of the story, just an unusually painful chapter of it. So here's how it all connects. His obsession with saying no gave him focus. His focus gave his sense of beauty somewhere to land. His trust and instinct over data let that beauty become products nobody had asked for and everybody suddenly needed. His certainty, reckless, unreasonable, sometimes cruel, was the engine that forced those products into existence on impossible timelines. And his refusal to accept failure as final was the reason he was even still standing there to do it all again. Take any one of those away, and there's no iPhone, no Pixar, no second act. None of it excuses the damage. The people who were humiliated, the daughter he didn't acknowledge for years before quietly making things right, the friendships that never recovered. Jobs' mind wasn't a clean formula for greatness. It was a set of extreme instincts that happened to occasionally point at brilliance, and just as often pointed somewhere darker. You don't need to become Steve Jobs. Most of what made him extraordinary also made him difficult to stand near. But the next time you're tempted to add one more feature, one more option, one more thing to a project that's already good enough, it might be worth asking his question instead. Not, what else could I add? What could I remove? So the one thing that matters is finally allowed to be seen.